Let's move on with a look through the international newspaper headlines of the morning with Haxima Spelkin. Hello there.
Hi, Catherine.
And unsurprisingly, we are going to start off with the international reaction to all this news coming out of Aleppo.
Absolutely. So let's start with this piece in the Washington Post headlined Endgame in Aleppo. We read here that with the rebels clinging on to a tiny pinprick of territory in just one corner of the city, it's only a matter of time before the government claims full control of the country's biggest metropolis. And the online version of this report is accompanied by a sobering photo essay. I've picked out two images. Here we see pro-regime fighters celebrating as they pass a stream of residents fleeing the violence. And there's also another photo of residents fleeing the rubble-strewn streets of Aleppo's Fardos neighbourhood. You can see it there.
Rebel strewn, very, very rainy. We've heard it's very cold in Aleppo at the moment as well. Those pictures illustrating the situation quite well. You've also found a piece in the Daily Beast that really takes stock of the human impact of the last few weeks in Aleppo since the Syrian regime really upped the intensity of its operation.
Yeah, we read here that with so many buildings having been razed to the ground, it's really impossible to determine any real death toll. We're also told that the UN has received what it calls credible reports of scores of civilians being killed either by intense bombardment or, as you were mentioning earlier, summary executions by pro-government forces. There's also a piece in British paper The Independent that argues that the West bears a heavy responsibility for what is happening. The author writes that having encouraged Syrians to rise up against President Assad, it then did little to help the moderate opposition. And while David Cameron, the former British Prime Minister, while his mantra of Assad must go, that meant that any compromise deals that could have put a stop to the bloodshed were in fact dismissed.
Well, speaking of pointing a finger of responsibility and blame, the United Nations and the US both said on Tuesday night at the UN that Russia, as well as Syria and Iran, have to accept responsibility for any atrocities that happen in Aleppo now. But you've got a piece from the Moscow Times with Russia really refuting that it's played any part in any kind of humanitarian catastrophe.
Yes, this piece in the more liberal-leaning Moscow Times quotes at length a Russian military spokesman who says, among other things, that all the theatrical screams supposedly in defence of the 250,000 civilians still in Aleppo are no more than Russophobic hot air. But it's really worth mentioning that the tone of this piece in the Moscow Times is extremely sceptical of those comments coming out of the Kremlin.
All right, let's move on to a completely different news story from the United States. Donald Trump continuing to pick his administration team for when he takes office in January. The most controversial pick of the recent days, at least, Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State. He's never held political office before. We're not really sure what his diplomatic experience might be, if any, and several newspapers looking closer at him.
Absolutely. So if we take a look at this article in the New York Times, we read that amid growing concerns in the Republican Party that Tillerson might be a little bit too cosy with Vladimir Putin, Trump is working hard to get GOP grandees to publicly back his choice, and it's working, we read here. The interesting thing here is that a lot of these people, like Jeb Bush and Robert Gates, have previously been very critical of Trump's choices, but their recent endorsements of Tillerson suggest that they now need Trump as much as Trump needs them. And for British centre-right paper The Times, the choice of Tillerson is proof that Trump is determined to rip up the world order as we know it. The fact that Trump has described the ExxonMobil chief as a world-class player and deal-maker will bolster, we read here, Trump's own instincts for transactional foreign policy, a policy that would tear up old alliances and transform America's place in the world. Now that same paper is running a witty little cartoon that imagines what that place might look like, and unsurprisingly, it looks a little bit like Moscow, the iconic St. Basil's Cathedral there, Trump's latest addition to the White House.
Very evocative cartoon indeed. You've also been having a look at the Polish press for us today.
Yes, thousands of people have been joining anti-government protests across Poland on the anniversary of the imposition of martial law by the then communist regime. So it's, of course, a very symbolic date for the country. This headline in mass circulation, Wojbosza, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, quotes a protester as chanting, "Down with communism." These people are marching to denounce what they see as creeping authoritarianism in the country. Communism, it's worth remembering, came to an end in the country in 1989.
All right, so just got time for one last story from Canada, where we're talking about the legalisation, decriminalisation of marijuana.
We are. The government has just received new suggestions that the market for recreational marijuana use should be competitive. And that has caused shares in Canadian marijuana companies to jump by around 6%. We're reading that in the Financial Post.
What does that mean? Sort of 3 for 2, buy one, get one free? Something like that? Interesting indeed.
But the centre-right conservative paper, the Mail and the Globe, thinks that's going to be very hard to implement. You need to safeguard the health of younger potential cannabis users whilst also keeping the market open for competition. This paper thinks that's going to be a bit too hard an ask.
Indeed. It's not quite the same as a bar of chocolate or something, is it? Thanks very much. Hagsy Belkin looking through the international press for us today. Time for a break now here on Live from Paris. We'll see you in a couple of minutes' time.